My name is William Margold, Margold, and for the last 3 decades plus, I've been involved in one letter of the entertainment alphabet, X, which of course is a twisted cross. And I have made myself immortal by being involved for over 30 years on every level of the adult entertainment business, starting as a writer, journalist, working up to an actor, director, script writer, agent, and now, currently, activist, spokesperson, and generally, I believe, the most knowledgeable person about the adult entertainment industry since its evolution in the early 1970s.
What do you want to talk about?
Well, I love talking about me, but I think I have to genuflect to the fact of my involvement in the adult entertainment industry, my involvement in protecting the privileges of consenting adults to perform in consenting adult material with consenting adults by consenting adults. I'll talk about anything. I can go off on tangents about real mainstream movie reviews because I write every week for the LA Express. I can go off on tremendous tangents if you want to discuss Major League Baseball. I'm a New York Yankee fan in Major League Baseball, and of course professional football. I'm a well too suffering and long suffering Detroit Lion fan. But it's what you want to talk about and it's what you want to hear that I can answer for you.
What is PAW?
Protecting Adult Welfare, a nonprofit organization, the PAW Foundation, was created in its entity in 1994 when a superstar named Savannah killed herself. Previously to that, we'd had other adult performers die, suicide and overdose, various other ways of demise, and I'd always thought that it would be important for the performers to have a place to come and basically talk to me where I could listen to them and try and help them through their problems. My background is very unique for being in the adult entertainment industry. A lot of it has to deal with growing up in social work settings such as Vista Del Mar and Culver City, Juvenile Hall, downtown LA as a child, 12 years old, and going back to work at Juvenile Hall in 1969 through 71 as a probation officer. When I came into the X-rated industry, I noticed almost immediately that the adult entertainer had the same psychological makeup as a juvenile delinquent, except they were adults. They were overage juvenile delinquents. So I became known as Papa Bear. Protecting Adult Welfare's logo is a teddy bear because I feel, and I have hundreds of teddy bears, and you'll see them throughout this tape if it's edited properly, I feel the teddy bear is the first creature, although it's stuffed, that you turn to as a baby and confide in because it's not going to lie to you, it's not going to talk back, it's just going to simply listen and keep your secrets. And of course, teddy bears also lead to a very important part of life, and that's hugging, because you will hug your teddy bear, and I think it's far more important, as I say on the sentiment on the wall of my office, hug is simply a three-letter word, and a very important three-letter word. Far more important than sex, which of course I represent, the sex business, but I also represent masturbatory catharsis for the masses. I represent the freedom, or privileged freedom, of participating in something that entertains people. And I'll quote a wonderful woman named Viper, who I lived with for 5 years. When asked why she made X-rated movies, she said so she could have sex with 10,000 men at a time rather than just one. Years later, when I was asked why I made X-rated movies, I said so I could have sex for 10,000 men at a time rather than just one. But when the people in the X-rated industry are troubled, unhappy, or just are questioning their reasons for existence, they'll come and see me in the Protecting Adult Welfare office, which is located at 4523 Van Nuys Boulevard, number 205 in Sherman Oaks, and we'll sit down and we'll talk. And when you come to that office later on in this documentary, you'll see that there's nothing sexual in there. There's no intimation of sexuality. Any pictures on the wall are discreetly covered because when you come there, you're not coming there to talk about sex. You're coming there to talk about perhaps why you, the performer's life, has gone astray because perhaps of being involved in the adult entertainment industry.
And how long has Paul been in existence? So what was your first day in the film industry?
Well, first you asked how long Paul's been in existence. Spiritually, Paul's been in existence all my life. from the moment I think that I started creating the groundwork for protecting adult welfare the day after I came to juvenile hall. I woke up that morning, and I was 12 years old, and I went into a dining room situation and noticed that there was a table where only one kid was sitting, and he was talking to his food. And I'd never seen anybody talk to their food before, so I went over and talked to him and made him smile and gave him some of my food. And after that was over, I remember coming out of the dining room into the day room in Unit R, and a counselor, a sir as we called them, walked up to me and said, "Thank you." And I said, "For what?" He said, "For paying attention to that kid." And so the rest of the day I paid attention to the kid. Then I was shipped out to Unit W, and I never saw that kid again. But I believe when I went back to juvenile hall to work, because I lived there for 3.5 years, or 3.5 months, 3.5 months in 1956. And when I left there on October 11th, 1956, to be taken to Vista Del Mar, I cried, and I was dragged down the hall, and I said, "I'll come back." And they never really understood what I meant until I managed to get a job going back there to work. And I, to this day, believe that the counselor or the sir who said thank you to me that morning became my supervisor when I went back there. But he didn't tell me. But he always used to treat me very specially, make sure, although I went back there and broke every rule, and which I've been breaking all my life. So I think I started to help people that began to rub off on me, and I always was for the underdog, always looking out for people worse off than I was, always wanting to help people. With protecting adult welfare, I had been counseling people in the industry by advising them to be sure what they were doing when they came into it from the moment I got into it. I don't want anybody else's conscience on mine. I'm a really pretty altruistic person in that respect, that I don't need to be destroying people's lives for the sake of economic gain or sexual gain. If they come into the industry and can convince me that they're doing it for the glory and immortality, I'll then nurture them along and magnify their glory as best as I can. There's a documentary about me called Sell Me Your Soul, where I've told people, sell me your soul and I'll trade it for immortality. And I can make you famous. I can make a person famous in this business by promotion. So PAW in existence has been part of my life for over 40 some odd years. But it became Protecting Adult Welfare officially in the late, 94 is when I created the organization, and it gained its 501c3 nonprofit status in 97, because it took a while to get it because of the machinations of certain people who were jealous of the fact that I had created it, which we could get into a litany of discussions about people who are my enemies, and I'm not paranoid because these are definitive enemies, but they're unworthy at this point to be discussed.
Who's Nathan Ross Margold?
Nathan Ross Margold is my father, or was my father, to the extent that I believe he really was. Now, I'm told that I was adopted. I'm not altogether sure I believe that. And the more I learn about Nathan Ross Margold, and the more I learn about my own past, surreptitiously, because I confronted my aunt 5 years after my mother died, and asked my aunt if she were my mother. And she said she wouldn't answer that question. I believe what happened in Washington, D.C. in 1943 or 42, because I was born in October, so maybe December of 42, that my father impregnated my mother's sister, totally agreeing to immediately absolve her of any maternal rights, and then I was born into the Margold family. I just believe that that's how I came about. Things have led me to believe that again. Like I say, I confronted my aunt in 1985, 5 years after my mother had died, because my mother sort of disowned me when I got into the adult entertainment business. We really were never altogether close anyway. I grew up in a series of high-class boarding schools, high-class military schools, very high-class education. Some of it was grammar school oriented, but every time I'd go to a regular public school, but every time I went to a public school, I was so far ahead of everybody else, I kept on skipping levels of it. I went to McKinley Grammar School in Santa Monica, where I spent a couple of years. I went to Black Fox Military Academy, Ramsey Military Academy, Starr Military Academy, Brentwood, or then Urban Military Academy, and then I was shipped back east for a while and went to two private schools, Cohut and Coville. In between all of that, I had grammar school training, I keep on saying grammar school, public training, but I skipped the 2nd grade and I skipped the 6th grade. By the time I got to the 9th grade, Palms Junior High, very close to here, while I was living at Vista Del Mar, I had sort of lost interest in being educated. I figured I knew all I really needed to know, and my mathematic prowess went right in the toilet. I really had never bothered to learn mathematics because I knew I'd never need it, so I'm somewhat ignorant when it comes to mathematics. But I'd always wanted to be what I am now. Bottom line, because I know you'll ask me the question of how I got into the business, I came into the X-rated industry with no other aim or goal than to write stories about it. I knew that nobody had really written about this business when I came into it. I learned about the adult entertainment industry from the underground publications of the late 1960s, early 1970s, the free press, and I would go to work immediately, or not immediately, but I would gain a job with a publication called Spectrum West. And one of the first stories I wrote was about a person in the adult entertainment industry. I decided...
What free press, was that a brand name or just a...
Well, the LA, there was a publication in Los Angeles in the late 1960s, early 1970s, known as the Los Angeles Free Press.
Was there something called The Finger, or...?
Well, that's interesting. You're mentioning a publication called The Finger. The Finger was a part of a publication called The Star, and it was a harder core version of The Star. The Finger got busted for obscenity a bunch of times because it pushed the level. And The Finger was part of Eberle's organization. He was one of the founders and one of the great pioneers in the history of underground journalism, as was, of course, the Spectrum West people. That was a man named Mike Steele, the Swing people, Yes, and, of course, in 1972, publication came on the racks called the Hollywood Press. And I had left Spectrum West because the man was editing my copy and I didn't like that, so I walked over to a waterbed store on Santa Monica Boulevard, and I met a wonderful man named Paul Picard with a huge amount of hair, and said, "Your paper's illiterate, let me write it for you." And he said, "What do you mean?" And I knew automatically I had found a home. And the the Hollywood Press evolved into the LA Express. I've been with those publications from Hollywood Press to LA Express for the last 32 years. And I have a page every week in the LA Express. On the back page, I write the cinema scene column. And I think when you read what I write, you'll find that sometimes I talk more about me than I do about the movie I'm reviewing, but inevitably I get to the movie I'm reviewing or movies I'm reviewing, and I tie them uniquely into my own life, which is exactly what I did with the X-rated industry. When I came into it, I began to meet people who wanted to be interviewed, and I would tell their stories, absolutely and totally truthful. And I remember being accepted into the business almost immediately, because the most important thing that you can give an adult performer is recognition, validation, credibility, what I refer to as a gold star in the middle of the forehead, or perhaps a golden X in the middle of the forehead. They want to be appreciated. So I began to write their stories, tell their tales, and then it got to the point where, pursuing one of my idols, a gentleman named George Plimpton, who wrote a book called Paper Lion, and I happen to be a Detroit Lion fan, I wanted to emulate him in this business, in the X-rated industry, so I convinced somebody to let me go on my first adult set. And then eventually I convinced somebody to let me be in an adult movie, thinking on October 1st, 1972, that I would fail. I would attempt to perform a hardcore act and fail and write a story about how I failed, and that would be the end of that, and I'd write other things. But lo and behold, laying on that rug in Venice, California, in a garage on Sunday, October 1st, with a woman, quote-unquote, sucking my dick, I functioned. And I popped on cue in her face. And I didn't get paid, because the man shooting it, the late Titus Moody, who was a wonderful human being and one of my great benefactors, told me that I'd bothered him so much about doing it that I had to write the movie, And then I had to basically perform in the movie, and I would not be paid for it. And I was quite happy to do that. The next day, I was flown to San Francisco to perform in a series of photo shoots, hardcore photo shoots, which eventually I would write into a book called Secrets of a Porn Star, which was a crock of shit because I wasn't a porn star in 1972. I don't think I ever really became a porn star. But I didn't want to pursue just one level of the industry. I wanted to be everything. So in the process, over the next 20 years, let's say, up until it became legal, next 16 years, in fact, till the Freeman decision, I worked in a lot of movies. I will take credit for about 500 hardcore sex scenes and appearing in about 300 adult movies. I've also probably appeared in an equal number of documentaries, and here's yet another appearance, cable television shows, mainstream television shows, going on news shows, defending this business, protecting this business, and also doing something very unique, attacking the business. When I feel that the business is wrong, I feel I have every right to attack it. I've earned the right to, as much as I care for it, criticize it, and that's where, again, the enemies rear their empty heads. This culminates, let me finish, with 1997. My idol was brought to my booth when I was doing the adult Free Speech Coalition booth at the show in January. A friend of mine found George Plimpton on the floor of the convention doing a story, brought him to my booth. And it's one of the few moments in my life where for 5 seconds I was speechless. Then I handed him my card, which is famous, and you can use a cutaway of my card. It says, God created man, William Margold created himself. And I handed it to him and said, George, I've been you in the adult entertainment industry for the last 25 years. He wasn't going to really take that seriously until I said, look at the colors on the card. And he said, that's our colors, Detroit Lion colors, silver and blue. Then we talked, and later on that year he called me, and for 2 hours we talked, and he did an article in Men's Journal about how this man he had met on the floor of the convention had alleviated him having to be in the X-rated industry because I was doing it for him.
And you had dinner with Einstein.
Well, my dinner with Einstein, which sounds like my dinner with Andre, is only related to me by the fact that my mother said that during the time that my father was alive, he died in 1947.
What did your father do?
My father, Nathan Ross Margold, was, by the time he died, he was a federal judge in Washington, D.C.
And he went to what school?
My father went to Harvard in around 1918, 1919, 1920, and then taught at Harvard. Then went on to become...
What did he teach?
My father, I guess he taught law of some level. My father his mentor was Felix Frankfurter, who would later on go on to be a Supreme Court justice. My father got involved with a great deal of civil rights activism in the 20s and 30s, helping Indians get their fishing rights on the Columbia River, the Shoshone tribe, which, by the way, I am because of my relationship to him. He was given honorary Indian chief, I guess, blessings, rights, whatever. I was given the same. I'm known in Shoshone as Heslo. I have a little purse at home, one of the few things of my childhood. I have nothing really of my childhood. I have a picture of me that maybe I was 6 years old. I have a little purse with Heslo written inside of it. I have some pictures of my father. I have nothing else of my childhood. But he went on to become involved in the Hindenburg tragedy by when he was Assistant Secretary of the Interior Department. He put the embargo on helium, and no more helium was sold to Germany, so the Hindenburg was loaded up with hydrogen and blew up in Lakehurst, New Jersey. And he also got involved very heavily in the civil rights of minorities, particularly the Negroes, and started to write and prepare what would eventually become Brown versus the Board of Education, which Thurgood Marshall, of course, ran with and became a Supreme Court justice, and that helped the ball start on the integration of education.
You never really answered the question about dinner with Einstein.
Well, during the time that we were living together in Washington, D.C. before he died, many famous people came to dine with my father. And my mother told me at one point in time that probably the most famous, beyond even Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who apparently also came there and ate with my father at one point or another. My father was a highly respected man, that Einstein came to dinner. And I was told that they ate Virginia baked ham. These are two very Jewish men, I suspect, but who's going to resist a Virginia baked ham baked by a mammy, Sadie, I think her name was, who suckled me, by the way, because that's another reason that leads to believe that perhaps my mother, Gertrude Weiner, or Jean Weiner, who married my father, was not my blood mother, because perhaps my blood mother either didn't want to suckle me or couldn't. So I was suckled by a black lady who gave me, by the way, I guess a tremendous amount of immunities, which I'm very lucky to still have, because I have rarely had anything wrong with me in my entire life that I haven't inflicted upon myself, which is a myriad of football injuries. But other than that, I've never had, nothing has broken down so far internally, and I'm 61 years old now. I don't think I look it, and God forbid, I don't think I don't even begin to remotely act it, because I think I am trapped in 1 year of my life that I liked the most, and that was my 12th year in juvenile hall. I don't think I've ever gone beyond that in my absolute contempt for authority, my absolute contempt for structure, rules. I can live within them if I help design them. I don't want anybody else telling me what to do. And yet, I'm in a business now that is in need of self-censorship and is in need of what I refer to as common censorship, SENSESORSHIP, common censorship. We have to clean up our own act before somebody else cleans it up for us.
Is there an AIDS problem in the adult industry?
HIV and the adult industry came into the forefront with the death of the king, John Holmes, in 1988. But after that, we didn't have another HIV problem until 1993, another in 1994, one or two in 96, 97, and in 98 we had what they say was an outbreak of 4 or 5 people. And then recently, in fact this year, 2004, we had another outbreak. But HIV is not what this industry has to fear. What this industry has to fear is the reason for HIV, and that's the incredible amount of drugs that are in my industry. And I am pushing now, besides to raise the age of 21 to enter into it, I'm pushing for intravenous drug testing to be incorporated into the testing we already do, which is for HIV, chlamydia, gonorrhea, sometimes herpes, sometimes hepatitis. But I think that if you treat your body like a trash can, it deserves to be in the dumpster. I loathe drugs. I have never done a drug in my life. This is my drug. Being interviewed here is a supreme high, because this is where I get to be me, I get to be on display, I get to preach Margold's Gospel of X, which is pretty damn honest X, since that's what this is going to be called. And when I worked at Juvenile Hall, and I never really called it, I hate calling it work because I couldn't wait to get there and I never wanted to leave.
Why?
Because when I got in there, I was taking care of people who basically I had learned such a wonderful time. The 3.5 months I lived there, I was treated so fairly and so uniquely, given the opportunity to raise up. I have to explain something. I was put in there for being incorrigible, and I still am. And when I went into Unit W, like around July 1st, 1956, there was this piece of wood on the table that had 28 little notches in it. And I started out as number 28. And if you worked your way up to one of the top 4 by doing chores, by answering questions, by essentially behaving, you would be a messenger. And you'd get what was known as a rag. And I remember that it took me about 4 days, because people left on a regular basis too, to get to number 4. And I never got to be number 1. The morning of October 11th, 1956, I woke up, and a guy above me had been shipped out. I was number 2. And he had been shipped out that in the middle of the night. He was gone. And I woke up and I was number 1. And then that afternoon, I was taken out of Juvenile Hall and put in Vista Del Mar. And I learned the most important lesson of my life there, that everything you get in life, you earn. if you're given something and haven't earned it, it's just not worth it. You got to work for everything you get, because then you'll appreciate it. In order to appreciate something, you have to have had suffered to get to it. If you're just given everything, you don't appreciate it at all. So when I went back to juvenile hall in 1969 to work there, I was so happy that I could impart that upon the people that I was on the kids that I was taking care of. It's funny that we're talking about this now, because just last week, after all these years, and I left there at the end of 71, I was fired for breaking all the rules, of course, because everywhere I go I break rules. That's why I'm in the X-rated industry, because I'm in the only business in the world that can't fire you. You can't be kicked out of the litter box. That's exactly what I call the X-rated industry. It's a gigantic litter box, and nobody's going to throw you out of that, because we do not deal with children, and we do not deal with animals, and we don't deal with really aberrant violence, which are the three great taboos in our industry. Certainly not going to work with an animal, because it could be the end of my career. I see no value in underage sexuality, particularly violating the rights of children who don't want to be there. And the aberrant violence, we're not going to really beat people up, because if we do that, we can't use them tomorrow. But when I came back to juvenile hall, I brought with me all of what I had learned after I left juvenile hall about how I had a pretty good time growing up. Vista Del Mar was very fair, and then I was on my own from 17 on. I tried to join the Marine Corps. They wouldn't take me because of my juvenile record. I tried to join the Navy. They wouldn't take me because of my juvenile record. We can get in that discussion later on. But just last week, after all these years, I received a call, and the guy said, "Did you work in juvenile hall in 1970? And I said, "Yeah." He said, "You took care of me." He's now a driver for the adult entertainment business. He takes the girls to their locations and stuff like that. And Monday, he came into my office, and we sat and talked and remembered a lot of things. One of the things that he said to me, the first thing he said, "I've waited all these years to thank you in person." And I said, "For what?" He said, "You saved my life. When while I was a kid in your unit, they were going to make a choice between where I would go, and they could have sent me to CYA, but when my case worker came to see you, you said, put him in our camp and then get him in the service." And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. He went to a camp, and he got to be a Marine. And everybody I know has been a Marine, and I've never got to be a Marine. It's interesting. I always wanted, one of the few things I've never gotten was that desire. I wanted to serve my country. I felt I should. I felt it was, my country had allowed me to grow up in it, so I figured I should give something back to it. Plus, I read a book. I saw a movie first, and then read the book called Battle Cry by Leon Uris. And in that, it talks about the Marine Corps, but it also talks about a writer named Marion Hotchkiss, who I guess was the alter ego of the man who wrote the book, Leon Uris. And I always thought I should be the next Marion Hotchkiss. That's why I even told the people, the Marines, let me in, I'll write a story. I'll write the next great war novel for you. They wouldn't take me. That was when I was 17. When I was 18 years old, I tried again, and on my birthday, October 2nd, 1961, I was down on Broadway at the, ready to be inducted, and they suddenly realized I had a juvenile record. When in fact, they had known it the whole time, and they said, "We can't take you. You have to go home." I had no home to go to. I had nowhere to live. I walked up Wilshire Boulevard that day, all the way from Broadway, downtown L.A., to Ocean Avenue, literally Ocean Avenue on the beach, Santa Monica. Saw a vacancy, went in, told the woman, "If I can't pay you by Saturday, you can throw me out." And I'd been working up to that point at the Riviera Country Club in the Pacific Palisades as a caddy. So the next morning I went up there and made $20. Next morning I went up there and made $20 more. I was a very good caddy. I had about $80 by Saturday when I gave her rent, which was $45 a month. That's a long time ago, kid. But I've been on my own in many ways since then, and always been able to watch over people. But again, this all began with a discussion of drugs. Where my total and absolute contempt for drugs came from is while I was working in Unit R in 1969, up to about the middle of 1970, kids would come in. They'd get booked, arrested and booked 24 hours around the clock. I worked an 8-hour shift, sometimes 16-hour shift because I didn't want to go home. And I'd get a kid who didn't look too good when I picked him up out of the holding tank. And on the way down the hall, he'd fall down. And then he'd die in front of me. And the nurse would come and kick him a few times and say, the kid's dead from an overdose. If you ever thought about doing drugs, if you saw enough people die in front of you, even one's enough, but I saw a lot of them die, and they would turn blue, and they were dead. These children were dead. These are children. These are 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old kids dying in front of me. See, again, I will never do any kind of drug at all. I had a unique adventure with Vicodin after I had a root canal, and the guy said, these are painkillers, and I said, well, what are they supposed to do? He said, they'll kill pain. So I refused to take one until finally I was going out of my mind. The root canal was pretty severe. So I took one. Then I made the mistake of walking to the market. It was 2 hours to go 4 blocks. I got to the market, and the lights were dancing on the ceiling. Walking home, I was walking into trees and falling down. I gave the Vicodins to somebody who wanted that kind of illusional high that I don't need. Again, this is the supreme high. I will be momentarily worn out after this interview, but since the rest of the day will continue to feature me, I'll keep my batteries as primed as possible. Does that answer any kind of question that you asked?
All right. Yes. Who are some of your heroes in the adult industry, and why?
My heroes in the adult industry are anybody who helped create it and make it what it is now. And the heroes begin with some unnamed and unknown, unsung heroes. In the earliest days of my career, there were very few of us. There were very few adult male performers particularly, and not many female performers. So my heroes of that first generation of hardcore performers include the men like Rick Lutz, Rick Cassidy, and of course, the unequaled John Holmes. And then, of course, in the women's area, my first heroes or heroines would be Renee Bond, Cindy Summers, Sandy Carey, Sandy Dempsey, the backbone of this business, the ones who will never get the credit they justly deserve. I have been, however, for the last decade or more, doing what I believed this industry would become. I'm honoring the history of it. I realized when I first got into it that we were about to make a huge imprint on society, and that in order to maximize that, somebody had to archive and remember and write about it, which I was doing. And I started to create honor systems, honoring the business. I became and helped create, in fact, an organization called the XRCO, X-Rated Critics Organization, which had the first authentic Hall of Fame. And we began to bring people into it. But that wasn't really enough, although we gave them nice little wooden hearts, and I have one at home, which you'll see later on when you do a cutaway. I felt we needed even more immortality, and it's based on one of my great quotes. And it's interesting, we've spoken now for a while, and I haven't even used any of my greatest of all quotes, but one of my great quotes is, "There is no future if in the present we fail to pay homage to the past." And in 1994, we began to induct people into Legends of Erotica in Las Vegas at 631 South Las Vegas Boulevard. We now have a building that's essentially part of it is a structured Hall of Fame. When you get inducted, and the induction is very important, and the induction moments are very important because the person being inducted has to choose a very important person in their life to induct them. So it's a mutual emotional situation for the person doing the inducting and the person being inducted, because inevitably both of them cry. And it's a beautiful moment. And if you come to it, which I hope you will, in January, you'll see the only reverential moments in the history of this business where the audience of 250 to 300 people sit silently, absolute in awe and reverence of the people being inducted. And we give them a 300-pound cement block, and they can do whatever they want to it. Some of them put their tits in, some of them put their asses in. I was inducted, surprisingly inducted, because I didn't expect it, in 1998. And again, one of the rare moments where I didn't say anything for a second or two, and then I said, you know, I deserve it. And they were stunned when I said that, but I think I said I deserve it because I've earned my place into this cement block. And so I wrote my name, Bill Margold, and I was inducted by a man named Raymond Pistol, who owns the store, and it was a total and absolute surprise. It's not my greatest moment in my life in the business. We'll talk about that in a second, but that brings up Viper again. She had already been gone from my life by that time for 7 years, but what I'm wearing here, the bear, is something she gave me in December of 1986. And it's the only material object in my life, in my world, that I would not give you. If you asked for anything else and you really wanted it, including the cats, but I don't know if you really want to deal with them, you're welcome to them. If you want my van, I guess you take on that problem. But I took the bear, took it off, and placed it in cement so it left its imprint. And then I cried up on the stage and thanked the people. It's interesting because I've had people tell me they're honored to talk to me when they find out that I'm on the other end of the line when they call me. But without them, I wouldn't be me, so I tell them it's an honor for me to talk to them. They made me famous. That card I show is a crock of shit. It's Bill Margold, or God created man, William Margold created himself. It will get a reaction. It's probably the most interesting card you'll ever get, but it's bullshit. I was created by the people who allowed me into their homes, they walked into screens and discovered me, and now I want to give it all back. It's the dedication that I have to this industry more than anything else to preserve it. And that's why I have a right to criticize it. And that's why it was tough this year the toughest year of my life has just passed. And I think I've been able to overcome the misery that I've gone through. I was brought into the Free Speech Coalition and then the Adult Video Association. I got elected to the board and became its heart, soul, brains, and conscience. But I guess they decided last year they didn't want any heart, brain, soul, or conscience because I was told by a miserable human being named Kat Sunlove, who is our legislative, whatever the hell she does up in Sacramento, which I think is nothing, that she was having trouble raising money because I was on the board, and if I resigned from the board, they'd be given $100,000 in donations immediately. I resigned because I thought that was for the good of the organization, and I'd never been worth $100,000 in my life, so I thought that'd be sort of a cool way of getting another layer of legendary status. They haven't gotten a cent because of my resignation. And Kat, at that point, pressed into service as executive director, was a complete failure at her job, and she now has gone back to Sacramento with her multiple tails between her multiple legs, and is up there doing whatever she does in the halls of Congress or halls of legislation, which I don't think that they want any part of this. I've always felt that it makes no sense to kiss the ass of people who are going to fart in our face. I have very little use for politicians. I don't trust them. I've even been offered an opportunity to become one, and I don't think I really like to do that, or there are things I'd like to get done inside the X-rated industry and outside the X-rated industry. But now I run Protecting Adult Welfare. I have another organization we haven't even discussed called Fans of X-Rated Entertainment, FOXE, which is the first and only organization where you have to pay dues, you only pay them once, $25, to join an organization wherein you admit you watch adult movies. Because, as I've said, and the motto of Fox, if society refuses to admit that it's jacking off, it shouldn't be upset when Congress cuts off its dick. So I created this to make the public, since there's hundreds of thousands, millions of people who watch adult material, nobody will admit to it. So I have an organization now, which has been dwindling, of about 1,300 strong throughout the United States who have joined the organization, and there'll be a show for them that you're welcome to come and cover on February 20th. I haven't decided on the location yet, but we have awards given out, voted for by the fans. They're called the Fan Favorite Awards. And a number of people, a number of performers have won that award 3 times and can't win ever again. Where we talked about who are my heroes in the business, a lot of the people who have won those awards 3 times and can't win anymore are my heroes. Nina Hartley, Ashlyn Gear, of course, the great studs in the history of the business, Peter North, Randy West, Shawn Michaels, T.T. Boy. These are people, Tom Byron, who've all won. You know, when you look at it and you scrape away all the bullshit and all the braggadocio of who I am, I think the bottom line is that I am and always will be a fan. And when I meet the famous people, and I guess I'm a famous person, when I meet them, I stand in awe of them and I genuflect to them. And when I hug them, it's a hug of a very lucky person getting to know these people who are very special. And I have created a number of ways of honoring them, like I said. My latest project, which is seemingly taking forever, is a deck of playing cards, which is also, again, the Legends of Erotica. And those cards start, of course, with it's a full regular deck of cards. They are the 52 most important people, most historically significant people in the history of the adult entertainment business. And I hope in the year 2022, when I am involved with naming the final 48, so therefore there'll be 100 all-time people, that I'm still alive and capable of doing that. It's not as far away now as it was back in 1999 when we finished the first 52 people. The years are galloping by at a horrendous rate.
The women you said that were in the initial creation of the adult industry, could you speak more about a couple of those individual women?
Well, when I got into the X-rated industry, when I got into the hardcore part of it, when I got into what was developing in the late 1971, 1972, the queens of X at that point in time, the people, and they weren't getting much credit. Marilyn Chambers was doing Green Door. Linda Lovelace was doing Deep Throat. They both made those movies in late 1971. One of them was shot in Florida. The other was shot in San Francisco. Door was shot up in San Francisco, Florida, Deep Throat. So those women were starting to rise on the forefront. But in L.A., which was the center of the adult entertainment industry even back then, although movies were being made in New York as well, but there were no real legends other than perhaps Tina Russell and Andrea True making X-rated movies at that point in time. We had women in the underground that were getting hassled by the vice cops all the time. And the first great name to come out of Southern California was Renee Bond. Renee Bond was a sort of Cupid doll-esque, pudgy-faced, pneumatic, round, gorgeous Cupid doll. Betty Boop type. She's dead. She passed away. We always, no one ever figured out why she was always so round-cheeked and why she was always so puffed up, and she died of liver failure. She was taking medicines that no one ever knew about, apparently, that made her chubby-cheeked. She was around at that point in time. She was one of the first names that I met, that I knew of, that I'd heard of. Sandy Carey and Sandy Dempsey. Sandy Carey was a beautiful blonde, fragile-looking blonde, who was just radiantly gorgeous. And then Sandy Dempsey, the woman with the butterfly on her hip, was a very attractive brunette. And then there was the woman I referred to as Lady Vanity, a woman named Cindy Summers, who was so spectacularly beautiful that your knees melted when you saw her. Now, I didn't get to work with those people because I was relatively insignificant, so I worked on a second tier of people. But eventually, through different kinds of circumstances, I got to make out with Renee Bond in a movie. And I say make out, which is, pretty good kissing and fondling. And that was really a treat because she was a hero in my eyes. Sandy Carey was desired by one of the photographers at that point in time. And he was upset when he had to shoot her with other men. So he chose me to shoot with her a lot, because he would growl at me if I got too fresh with her. And of course, I was overwhelmed by her anyway, so I wasn't going to be getting too fresh. I never worked with Dempsey, which was sort of sad. I would have liked to because she was really cool and always very pleasant to me. But Cindy Summers, who I just collapsed every time I saw her because she was so pretty. She looked like a big Angora cat. She had this cat-like face, perfect breasts, red hair, which of course has been my downfall. I worship redheads. And I finally got to work with Cindy Summers partially in a movie in Texas in 1973. And I remember I got to kiss her. And she like swallowed my head. I'd never kissed anything like that in my life. I like to make out, but when I kissed her, I felt like my whole head was inside of her mouth. And I said it was like the equivalent of getting an autographed baseball from Mickey Mantle. That's the best I could say. And then she allowed me to, she sat on my face for a while in the scene, but she said I couldn't get too fresh because her boyfriend, Rick Cassidy, was walking around grumbling about it. And I remember that I was just nibbling around but never really got a good time. She didn't do anything to me, by the way, but I was hard as a fucking rock. And it's interesting because that movie, we were told, and the woman I worked with is a very famous name in this business, a woman named Barbara Bourbon. It was her first movie. It was before she did The Private Afternoons of Pamela Mann. And the director of the film really did not know anything about the sex business. He was more of a mainstream director. And he said, you need to go get ready to have sex. And I was so new in the business, I had no idea what I was doing. So I remember Barbara and I go, and Barbara was gorgeous. She was tall, titless, my favorite kind of woman. Tomboy, torn up jeans, torn up T-shirt, boots, the whole thing. And she was just so cool. We went into the other room and we said, what are we supposed to do now? And I said, I have no idea. So they forgot about us. And we fucked for 2 hours. And it was a good time. Then they finally figured out we were in that room. They knocked on the door, are you ready? And I said, I was ready the second I came into this room. So we went back out, and it's the first recorded hardcore scene of my career. There is another hardcore scene I don't talk about in a movie, which was done in August of 1972 by accident, and that's a whole other story that was relatively embarrassing. But
tell me about it.
Well, the first movie I ever appeared in was called The Goddaughter. And I appeared in it to write a story about it. And I appeared in it to, the reason I really wanted to be in a movie was to die. Because I always wanted to get killed in a movie. And that would be sort of a strange form of celluloid immortality. And I had developed, while I was in grammar school, some very famous games that we played all weekend long, where they started on Saturday morning and ended on Sunday night. You chose up teams, and if you died, you had to go home. There was none of this bullshit about counting to 10. So you were very careful when in time to stay out of the way of people shooting you. We had definitive referees. You could not be shot, let's say, across the schoolyard and be dead. But if somebody came up from behind you and was within a foot or two of you and bang, 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 you're dead. Or they stabbed you in the back, you're dead. I had real storylines, I had real scenarios, and it was a great time. But I'd always thought that being killed on film would be the supreme destiny for me because I could see it over and over and over again. So in this movie, I was playing, The Goddaughter is based on The Godfather. And it was really a well-written, well-thought-out movie. And they rehearsed me for it.
Shot on film.
Well, shot on 35 millimeter. It's a real movie. They rehearsed me for it, and I was so bad in the rehearsal that they said, you're going to be known as dummy. You won't be able to talk in the movie because you're a terrible actor. And I said, that's okay, as long as I get killed. So finally, it comes time for me to die. And my partner in the movie is a guy named John Potts, who played this guy named Lucy or something. He already is dead, and he's hanging upside down in a garage covered in blood. And I come in, and the heroine in the movie is up on a cross, covered in blood, she'd had a tough time. She'd been supposedly, there's no sex in there, but it's just she'd been beaten up really bad. So I take her down and I make sure she's okay. Then I notice that he's up on the upside down. So I go over and I hug him to cover myself in blood, and I'm pretending to cry. And then the guns start going off, and I start going ooh 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 ooh, but I'm not falling down because I'm figuring this is my moment. So finally, the director says, "Somebody come in and stab him." So somebody comes in and starts pounding on my back, and finally, I did a perfect death fall, landed on my chin, elbows, and knees, and was bloody by the time I got up because I didn't break my fall. And I waited, and the guy called cut. Then he came over and he kicked me a couple of times. He said, "You're an unbelievable ham." And I thought that was really sort of cool. I didn't think any more of it. Then, of course, as dummy, I didn't have any real dialogue or anything like that. There was some kind of orgy, and this was a simulated movie. This wasn't real hardcore. This was simulated exploitation film. And there was this orgy, and I got on a couch, and Annie Calhoun went down on me pretending to blow me, and Kathy Hilton was sitting above me, and I finally reached back and felt my first pair of X-rated tits, which were phony tits, and they felt horrible, like had rocks in them, and they felt leathery, and they were really sort of uncomfortable. I don't even like tits. I like flat-chested women. But then all of a sudden, after we were done, I got up, and I think it was Annie. He said, "Look, it's stupid dummy forgot to take his pants off." And I had indeed forgotten to get nude. Everybody else in the room was naked, and I had forgotten. I was so terrified that I'd forgotten to take my pants off. Now, as the movie went on, it shot for like 6 days. People stopped showing up. Characters disappeared. And finally, they said, well, all we got left is this idiot dummy, and we need a couple of scenes with the star of the movie, Diana Hardy, who was playing the goddaughter, basically. Well, she was playing the James Caan character. She was playing, like, the really asshole of the three. There was Pacino's character, which is played by a woman named Kathy Handfuss. I don't think there was a Frito character, but Diana Hardy was playing this absolute bitch. And she was also a bitch. She's dead now. She overdosed, but she wasn't a nice person. She screamed and yelled and was cranky. So they had to put somebody in the scenes with her. And they figured I was the only person left logically they could use, even if I was going to play double characters. So the first scene, I'm rolling around with her, and it went all right, but she was like screaming at me and telling me that I was a jerk and all that kind of stuff, and I didn't really care. The scene was over and I left. Second scene, they establish a situation where Dummy comes in to service her before he's sent off to die, not knowing that I'm going to die in the garage, which had already been shot. She made the fatal mistake, now I was taking my clothes off by that time, by the way, of kissing me and fondling me. Fatal error. I happen to like to be kissed, and if you play with my dick enough, back in those days, it's going to get hard. Now, the cameraman notices that my dick's hard and notices he can see it. The sound man, who's a very good friend of mine to this day, was sleeping. He didn't know what the hell was going on. You could hear him snoring in the background. It was 4:30 in the morning. So the cameraman starts screaming at me, "I can see your dick." Well, I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I was terrified. I'm about 100 pounds more than I was then. So I'm bone rail thin, shaking like a scalded puppy. And finally, the dick is not going down because she's beginning to enjoy this. So she says, all right, and she referred to me by dummy. She said, you are really the dummy. You can stick it in, but don't enjoy it. And of course, I have no idea what's going on by this time. I am totally over my head in what's going on. So I stick my dick in her, and the cameraman notices it's gone. Can't see my dick anymore. Has no idea where it is, but is very happy to see that it's gone. Shoots the scene. I pretend to get off. Never did come in the scene, by the way. And then she throws me out of the room. When it's over, she came over to me and said, you didn't enjoy that, did you? And I said, no, I didn't enjoy it. I was ashamed of what had happened. And for 20 years, this was 72, it took me 20 years to conjure that up again because I never spoke about it because nobody ever asked me about simulated sex. So I never talked about it in any classes I went to lecture in. And then I was lecturing out at Orange Coast, no, I think it was College of the Canyons. And somebody said, tell us about the simulated days. The whole nightmare came back. Now I relate it very gleefully as one of the, lowlights of my career. And for years, until she died, Diana Hardy would come to the office at 6912 Hollywood Boulevard, where I ran the agency for Sunset International. And she would walk up and she'd grab my crotch and say, you didn't enjoy that, did you? And I said, well, no, I really didn't enjoy it. And it's interesting because I didn't. I absolutely was in way over my head. And the fact that the industry allowed me to continue after that mistake was interesting, because by the time I got back to the office, Reb, who was running the agency, said, you fucked up. And I said, but I'll talk about it. I'll write stories about it. I never did until now. I talk about it freely, but I was ashamed, absolutely, totally ashamed. But
what were you ashamed of?
well, I was ashamed that I could not control my dick. I was ashamed that I had been carried away to the point that the dick was not going to go down. You could have hit it with a hammer, and that dick was going to stay rock hard. It was just until she finally, the scene was over, and she finally said, you didn't enjoy that, did you? Making sure and grabbing a hold of my balls at the same time. My dick sort of subsided at that point, but I didn't know what to do.
So she told you to stick the dick inside of her so she could hide the dick.
Yeah, because she was getting frustrated. And I was terrified. And thank God I was given another chance, which of course culminated in October 2nd, 1972, which was my birthday. I was flown to San Francisco, and I did 5 scenes in 7 hours. Are we out of tape? You may have noticed that while I was talking about the history of this business, I had some tears in my eyes, because without this industry creating the history for itself, I wouldn't be here endorsing the history and magnifying the history. And I think that people are scared of the fact that my sincerity has no price, that I can't be bought, that there's nothing else in the world I want now, with the exception of the Detroit Lions in the Super Bowl. So I haven't missed anything. And in reality, when I'm able to talk so easily about what I've done, people are amazed, because my life sounds like a fairy tale or a fantasy, and it's all true. I'm so good at telling my story because you don't have to remember the truth. And that's why this show, or this piece of footage, is known as Honest X. With all my accomplishments in this business, the thing that's made me happiest was the evening that Viper won her Supporting Actress Award from the Adult Video News organization, which I have very little use for. But I'd worked so hard to get her some form of validation that the night they gave her award, and all she could do was get up there and say thank you, was the happiest moment of my entire life. Where I want to perpetuate my happiness, what I've learned, what I can give back to society, is by one day being able to teach a class called the ABCs of X, which would be the entire history of this business, taught by a person who lived it, and then bring in people from the history of this business to further validate and teach and educate what this is all about. And that, I think, would be the final chapter in my life, or a book about me, written by somebody who wants to spend 1,000 hours with me, listening to my tale, and put it out under the title Playpen of the Damned. That's where if I ever do die, which I seriously doubt for the time being, I guess if I have a tombstone, it'll say, he got it up when it counted. half years in, or 3.5 months, I'm sorry, 3.5 months in 1956. And when I left there on October 11th, 1956, to be taken to Vista Del Mar, I cried, and I was dragged down the hall, and I said, I'll come back. And they never really understood what I meant until I managed to get a job going back there to work. And I, to this day, believe that the counselor or the sir who said thank you to me that morning became my supervisor when I went back there. But he didn't tell me. But he always used to treat me very specially, make sure, although I went back there and broke every rule, and which I've been breaking all my life. So I think I started to help people. That began to rub off on me, and I always was for the underdog, always looking out for people worse off than I was, always wanting to help people. With protecting adult welfare, I had been counseling people in the industry by advising them to be sure what they were doing when they came into it from the moment I got into it. I don't want anybody else's conscience on mine. I'm a really pretty altruistic person in that respect, that I don't need to be destroying people's lives for the sake of economic gain or sexual gain. If they come into the industry and can convince me that they're doing it for the glory and immortality, I'll then nurture them along and magnify their glory as best as I can. There's a documentary. It's what you want to talk about, and it's what you want to hear that I can answer for you.
What is PAW?
Protecting Adult Welfare, a nonprofit organization, the PAW Foundation, was created in its entity in 1994 when a superstar named Savannah killed herself. Previously to that, we'd had other adult performers die, suicide and overdose, various other ways of demise, and I'd always thought that it would be important for the performers to have a place to come and basically talk to me, where I could listen to them and try and help them through their problems. My background is very unique for being in the adult entertainment industry. A lot of it has to deal with growing up in social work settings such as Vista Del Mar and Culver City, Juvenile Hall, downtown LA as a child, 12 years old, and going back to work at Juvenile Hall in 1969 through 71 as a probation officer. When I came into the X-rated industry, I noticed almost immediately that the adult entertainer had the same psychological makeup as a juvenile delinquent, except they were adults. They were overage juvenile delinquents. So I became known as Papa Bear. Protecting Adult Welfare's logo is a teddy bear because I feel, and I have hundreds of teddy bears, and you'll see them throughout this tape if it's edited properly, I feel the teddy bear is the first creature, although it's... My name is William Margold, M-A-R-G-O-L-D, and for the last 3 decades plus, I've been involved in one letter of the entertainment alphabet, X, which of course is a twisted cross. And I have made myself immortal by being involved for over 30 years on every level of the adult entertainment business, starting as a writer, journalist, working up to an actor, director, script writer, agent, and now, currently, activist, spokesperson, and generally, I believe, the most knowledgeable person about the adult entertainment industry since its evolution in the early 1970s.
What do you want to talk about?
Well, I love talking about me, but I think I have to genuflect to the fact of my involvement in the adult entertainment industry, my involvement in protecting the privileges of consenting adults to perform in consenting adult material with consenting adults by consenting adults. I'll talk about anything. I can go off on tangents about real mainstream movie reviews because I write every week for the LA Express. I can go off on tremendous tangents if you want to discuss Major League Baseball. I'm a New York Yankee fan in Major League Baseball, and of course professional football. I'm a well too suffering and long-suffering Detroit Lion fan, but stuff that you turn to as a baby and confide in because it's not going to lie to you, it's not going to talk back, it's just going to simply listen and keep your secrets. And of course, teddy bears also lead to a very important part of life, and that's hugging, because you will hug your teddy bear, and I think it's far more important, as I say on the sentiment on the wall of my office, hug is simply a 3-letter word, and a very important 3-letter word. Far more important than sex, which of course I represent, the sex business, but I also represent masturbatory catharsis for the masses. I represent the freedom, or privileged freedom, of participating in something that entertains people. And I'll quote a wonderful woman named Viper, who I lived with for 5 years. When asked why she made X-rated movies, she said so she could have sex with 10,000 men at a time rather than just one. Years later, when I was asked why I made X-rated movies, I said so I could have sex for 10,000 men at a time rather than just one. But when the people in the X-rated industry are troubled, unhappy, or just are questioning their reasons for existence, they'll come and see me in the Protecting Adult Welfare office, which is located at 4523 Van Nuys Boulevard, number 205 in Sherman Oaks, and we'll sit down and we'll talk. And when you come to that office later on in this documentary, you'll see that there's nothing sexual in there. There's no intimation of sexuality. Any pictures on the wall are discreetly covered, because when you come there, you're not coming there to talk about sex. You're coming there to talk about perhaps why you, the performer's life, has gone astray because perhaps of being involved in the adult entertainment industry.
And how long has Paul been in existence? So what was your first day in the adult industry?
Well, first you asked how long Paul's been in existence. Spiritually, Paul's been in existence all my life. From the moment I think that I started creating the groundwork for Protecting Adult Welfare, the day after I came to juvenile hall. I woke up that morning, and I was 12 years old, and I went into a dining room situation and noticed that there was a table where only one kid was sitting, and he was talking to his food. And I'd never seen anybody talk to their food before, so I went over and talked to him and made him smile and gave him some of my food. And after that was over, I remember coming out of the dining room into the day room in Unit R, and a counselor, a sir as we called them, walked up to me and said, "Thank you." And I said, "For what?" He said, "For paying attention to that kid." And so the rest of the day I paid attention to the kid. Then I was shipped out to Unit W, and I never saw that kid again. But I believe when I went back to juvenile hall to work, because I lived there for 3.5